We're going to take a look at the stereo decimator, and like usual, we're going to get pretty scientific with it. The first parameter that I want to talk about is this high dampening. And I have a sine wave coming out of mod 7 with feedback assigned to one of my tone adjust controls. So look at the sine wave through the oscilloscope, which is right here. The oscilloscope is calibrated to look at about 500 hertz. I'm about 1.2 hertz off. And I'm playing a 500 hertz sine wave, so one sine wave will take up the full graph. As you can see, there's a bit of jitter because of this 1.2 offset, which is going to make this have to kind of continuously keep tracking the phase. Anyway, this isn't about how oscilloscopes work. This is about the decimator. So if I turn up the feedback of this sine wave, we get a sawtooth wave when I go high enough, and then if I continue to turn it up, it devolves into noise. It is a bit pitched, but the only thing that I'm worried about is creating a full spectrum sound, because it's with that full spectrum sound that you'll very easily be able to see what the high dampening control does. So this is a percentage. Right now we're at 0%, which means no high dampening. When I turn up the percentage, it just behaves like a low pass filter. At 100%, we're completely closing off the sound. Nice, and let me go back to a sine wave. Now, we have a 500 hertz sine wave. Let's start and take a look at the sample frequency. So with the sample frequency, this is basically resampling whatever is coming into this insert effect at this rate. So when you have a sample rate, you are basically taking a sample of whatever amplitude or voltage is occurring at the time of whatever input that you're reading. That might be a single waveform, full track, whatever. And it's with those samples that the computer is storing data, recreating the sound. So if we lower the sample rate, we are essentially telling the computer to take less snapshots, is to take pictures less often of the sound. So this starts off at 48 kilohertz, which is the same internal sampling rate that the Kronos operates at. So you get no change in sound at 48 kilohertz. It's exactly the same. If I lower the sample rate, I can go all the way down to to 1 thousand hertz. 1 kilohertz or 1,000 hertz. So look at what happens to the waveform as we lower the amount of snapshots. You'll notice that the waveform will start to become more stepped, till we're all the way at 1,000 hertz. So with some simple maths, we can actually figure out exactly how many times it's sampling the waveform per cycle. So if we have a 500 hertz sine wave and we have a 1,000 hertz sample rate, basically for every single cycle, we have a 2-to-1 ratio. We're sampling the waveform twice. And that's really easy to see in the oscilloscope. With one sample, 2 samples. So the amplitude is here during this sample, the amplitude is here during this sample. If I were to turn up the sample rate to some multiple of 5, since we're at 500 hertz, we were at a 1-to-2 ratio at 1,000 hertz, but now at 1.5 kilohertz, we're at a 3-to-1 ratio. So we'd be sampling the waveform 3 times per cycle. 1, 2, 3. So on and so forth, with any multiples of 5. And then, of course, if I don't have a multiple of 5, all that means is that it's sampling the waveform an odd number of times per cycle. So we don't have an even 5, we don't have an even 4, it's somewhere between 3 and 4. So 1, 2, 3, and it's not quite 4. Pretty easy to understand. Now I need to talk about aliasing. So you've probably heard of aliasing. You might have an understanding of it already. But basically, there's this thing called the Nyquist limit, which says that a system can't accurately represent a waveform that is more than half the sample rate. So if we have, let's go with the sample rate of 2K, basically we can only accurately represent waveforms above, we can't accurately represent waveforms above 1 kilohertz. And if we do go above 1 kilohertz, we will simply create an aliasing tone below that. So let me go to this diagram, which might help better explain aliasing. Let's say that we have this wheel, and it has this one spoke that's spinning around. And if I told you that I took pictures of this wheel 1 time per second, and then I asked you how the wheel was moving, you would look at each picture and be like, okay, this represents 1 time per second. I'm guessing that it's rotating 90 degrees counterclockwise every second. But it would also look exactly the same if it was rotating clockwise 1 3/4 rotations per second. So 1 full rotation and then 3/4. So it's just that the camera isn't fast enough. It doesn't have a high enough sample rate to accurately represent the motion of the wheel. Thus, the wheel is appearing as a false representation of itself. It's appearing under a false alias. And that's exactly what's going on in the frequency domain with aliasing. To continue on this example, let's say that the wheel is rotating even faster than that clockwise. Let's say that it's going through 1 7/8 rotations. Well, that way, the pictures would tell us that the wheel is rotating even more slowly, about 45 degrees per second counterclockwise, when in reality it's going even faster. So in other words, the faster the wheel is moving, the more slowly it looks like it's moving in the opposite direction. So if I go back and we look at our spectrum analysis, and I flip over to a sine wave that is just being modulated to go up in frequency, and then we look at our sampling frequency, which is at 2K, basically anything above 1 kilohertz is gonna again create our aliasing tone below. So as we creep up higher, we're gonna see the aliasing tones come down. So this would be technically out of our hearing range if this was at full fidelity. Then once we pass 1 kilohertz, we just see this tone go down, down, down. Of course, we get other complex reactions that are going on too. So hopefully that long-winded explanation made sense. It's actually past midnight here, so I'm a little tired. It might not have been the best explanation, but nonetheless. There's 2 more things I need to talk about. One is about how the sampling frequency actually can't represent some tones in the frequency spectrum. And I'll show you that by going and, sorry, let me reset that. There we go. I'll show you with my noise waveform. And as I change the resampling frequency, you'll see certain dips in the spectrum analyzer. So I'll go down to 2K again. Let's see. And you'll see at 2K, we get this dip here. And that's because if we're sampling at 2K, then any cycles that are happening at 2K are getting sampled in the same spot every time. It's going to be the same amplitude every time it takes a picture. So when you look at that, when you try to play that back, that data, if you were to look at that data let's say it's the wheel, it would basically look like the wheel isn't moving at all. And if we have, no cycling, then we have no frequency, we have no tone there. And it follows that harmonic multiples also suffer this same kind of unrepresentation. So we can see at 2K, 4K, so on and so forth harmonically. I can actually represent this a little bit better with this noise. If I choose noise, and then I have this other, this is also reducing the sample rate with this plugin. And we see the same dips. I think this is going actually down to 1K. You can see this 1, 2. This is about at 3K. 4, 5, again, so on and so forth harmonically. Harmonic multiples can't be represented. The last thing to talk about is this low-pass filter. And this is acting as an anti-aliasing filter. It's literally just a low-pass filter that is going to be half the rate. Its cutoff point is going to be half of our sampling frequency. And anti-aliasing filters work like this in real life too. So if you have like a 48 kilohertz sample rate, and you're going to want to start attenuating anything that is more than half of, that is more than half of that sample rate. So your anti-aliasing filter will be strongly dipping things out at around 24 kilohertz. So let's go and bring our sampling frequency back up to 48. And we actually can't see 24 kilohertz here, but let's go ahead and turn on our pre-low pass filter. And then do we have noise? Yeah, we have our noise coming through. So as I drop the sampling frequency, you'll see kind of a low pass filter occur. That's supposed to help with, of course, aliasing. So we're at about 10 right here. I can actually go exactly to 10. And you can see that in the spectrum analyzer, we have a huge dip at 5. So it's strongly dipping. And then if I were to continue going down all the way to 1, we'd go to about 500, which is the lowest trough in that is occurring from our low-pass filter. Of course, if I take off the low-pass filter or anti-aliasing filter, we get all that spectrum back and all that noise and aliasing back. Cool. So that's it for this section. Let's move on to the resolution, the bit resolution or bit depth. So with this control, if we were lowering basically how the waveform was being sampled, or you could think of it as quantized, as far as frequency goes, this is the amplitude quantization. And so right now it's 24 bits, which is, again, the bit depth, the internal bit depth of the Kronos, so we would get no change. But if we lower this, we'll start to, again, see a kind of stepping, since the amplitude of the waveform is being that resolution is being reduced. So let me go ahead and start reducing that, and actually let me switch back to a sine wave, and then go all the way down. We're at 4 bits now. Let me just remove this. So with bit depth, it's really the noise floor that's losing the most fidelity. So if I were to change the amplitude of the sound, and if I were to go down, you can see we actually lose a lot of resolution. And then I can go even further down until it's just, there's nothing there. There's not enough resolution to represent what's there. I can increase the bit depth, and actually it's all the way down, so let me turn that up a bit. And then let me lower the bit depth. That's pretty crazy. So at a lower bit depth, we're actually creating a louder sound since the quantization is getting so broad. But then we can see that there's more fine details as we increase the resolution. So we bring it up, bring this down. It's pretty fun. It's pretty interesting stuff. And of course, we go up here. It's a pretty crazy jump in representation just from changing the amplitude of the waveform. So this would really warrant a bigger discussion talking about like noise floor, and I would have to do some pretty complex setups to represent that accurately. And the gain staging is really difficult to show, but I think I've explained enough about what this parameter does. So I hope this was pretty good and you got something out of this. And thank you for watching. Take care.